flame flickered in its red globe, and the stone church grew dark as the end of days. Cyril knew what he had done, but he didn't care. If Fidela did not love him and him alone, it was only right that she be damned. Love turns to hate, like wine to vinegar. Fidela spent her days dragging Bodine Wilde out of bars and the arms of other women. When she wasn't nursing a squalling baby, she was expecting one. When she wasn't swollen like a tick, she was working like a dog. But an odd thing happened. Instead of Fidela breaking, she grew stronger. Her back ached and her fingers cracked and bled, but her constitution hardened like cast iron. Cyril's words had tangled with the black woman's whispered spell in the church rafters. While Fidela would always be possessed by love, she would never be any man's slave. One woman's crumb is another woman's cake. Cooing, preening, and parasols twirling, women flocked to Cyril, but he would have none of it. Cyril Rudolph was wed to revenge. Hate burrowed into his core like a worm into an apple, rotting his soul from the inside out. His hair turned white, his eyes faded to ice blue, and spite surged through his veins like venom. Every night he stood alone at the church altar and renewed his vow. "She will never share her bed with a man who loves her like I do," he prayed through gritted teeth. "Bring her back to me. Bring her home." And every day Cyril paced back and forth at the dock, waiting for his prayer to be answered. To prove his faith and to pass the time, Cyril set out to build Fidela a home to come home to. It was a mansion the likes of which none had ever seen in these parts, an antebellum castle of sorts, with marble mantels shipped from France and mosaic tiles from Italy. It took 2 years for the glass dome to arrive from Europe, and 26 men with mules and pulleys to lower it into place. A house possesses the personality of its owner. Despite all the expense and attention to detail, the chapel of Cyril's devotion was as inviting as the snap of a whip. The heavy doors had locks on the outside as well as in. Every tree, shrub, and patch of tall grass dense enough to crouch behind was sheared to the ground, and the wrought iron mullions on the windows were scarcely wide enough to pass a tin plate through. His beloved's Bastille, perched on the highest hill in the county, glaring down at the river. Every night Cyril lit a lantern in his bedroom window, a dark star to guide Fidela home. It seared a red spot in the black sky, and the locals took to calling it the Devil's Eye. Eventually, a business dispute involving 5 queens and a pair of Colt revolvers left Bodine Wilde floating face down in the Tennessee River. Fidela didn't have the money to bury her husband, and so she filled his pockets with stones, kissed his cold lips, and watched his handsome face fade to the muddy bottom. Cyril was eagerly waiting at the dock the day Fidela came home, but when she stepped off the riverboat, every jaw dropped. Fidela Wilde was hanging on the arm of an even worse rascal than the one she'd run off with in the first place. Despite living fast and hard, Fidela had scarcely aged a day since she'd left. Nothing stuck to Fidela long, not even time. She was laughing as she walked by Cyril, gay as a drunk on a sinking ship. Their eyes met, and she smiled. What was meant to be kindness, Cyril took for pity. But the truth was, Fidela did not recognize the withered old man standing on the dock. Nothing remained of the Cyril she once knew. In the end, Fidela took 4 good-looking, good-for-nothing husbands to her bed. How many she interviewed for the position is anyone's guess. But she never gave Cyril so much as the time of day. Fidela would never share her bed with a man who loved her as he did. In cursing Fidela, Cyril had cursed himself. The sins of the mother are visited upon the daughter. From that day forward, every wild woman has been born with a sliver of the devil's mirror in her eye. A gentle boy with love in his heart sends her running for the hills. A clean-living, hard-working, church-going man turns her frigid as an icicle hanging off the eave. Wild women are drawn to wild men. Men who would sooner chew their arm off as slip a ring around their finger. Dangerous men with trouble in their eyes make a wild woman's lips part. A man who answers to no law but his own makes her legs spring open like a nutcracker. When a woman looks into her mother's eyes, she sees her future. When she looks into her daughter's eyes, she sees her past. But when she looks into the eyes of the man she shares her bed with, she sees the life she has chosen. Love lifts a woman up or drags her down. When a wild woman dies, they don't have to dig a hole. Chapter 1. The stock market crash in 1929 was not the only event that darkened that Black Friday in Five Points, Tennessee. That was the day Pearl Wilde found her little sister moaning in the spring house next to the butter molds. It was cool and dark, but Pearl had no doubt it was her only sibling. Along with her favorite pair of shoes, Kat was wearing Pearl's fiancé. Naturally, Pearl put all the blame on her sister. A man is like a water well. He has absolutely no control over who primes his pump. "This is all your fault!" Pearl screamed, stabbing her finger at Kat's leg, sticking straight up in the air. Slowly, Bourne Kavanaugh looked back over his broad, bare shoulder, his handsome face blurred with whiskey and desire. Pearl sank into those watery blue eyes like an unholy baptism, and her resolve began to dissolve. Bourne knew all he had to do was say the right thing, and Pearl would be begging him for forgiveness. "Please, darling," he slurred, "gimme just one more minute." It just shows how low a woman is willing to go that, for a full 30 seconds, Pearl considered it. But then something rose up inside her, something so deep she didn't know she had it in her. Grabbing the empty whiskey bottle that rolled on the floor, she threw it with all she had. Bourne's hand flew to his face as the bottle smashed against the wall, but not fast enough to stop the shard of glass from slicing him from brow to cheek. He touched his fingers to his face and stared at his blood. Then his eyes slowly rose to Pearl's. The look that passed between them said it all. But then body language had always been their preferred form of communication. Ripping her shoes off Kat's dirty feet, Pearl caught the first train out of town. The next 3 years of Pearl Wilde's life are somewhat murky. Frank Merrill, the pharmacist, thought he spotted her getting into a shiny black limousine in Chicago, but the man with her roughly assured Frank he was mistaken. How Pearl ascended from 5 Points into a Chicago limousine was a mystery, but everyone knew she had been born to climb. Then, halfway through Grand Hotel, Eddie McGowan jumped up and pointed at the flickering screen. "That's Pearl Wilde!" he cried out in the dark theater. Dickie Deason, who worked the camera booth on weekends at the Roxy, rewound the projector and played the scene over and over until the film finally snagged and hung. They watched quietly as Pearl's face melted away. But the vision of her covered in shimmering rhinestones and sipping champagne from a long-stemmed glass was forever burned into their minds. The only other hint of Pearl's whereabouts was the postcards that arrived every month postmarked New Orleans, Chicago, New York, Paris, Rome, Berlin, and someplace in the Orient nobody at the post office had ever heard of. Regardless of the card's origin, the message was always the same. "Kat Wilde, I still hope you burn in hell." Pearl always did have beautiful penmanship, Miss Mabel Hilliard said, running her finger over the exotic stamp with a touch of longing. And she was a persistent child. Once she sank her teeth in, there was no letting go. Miss Mabel had been enlightening the bright and the dull alike in the one-room schoolhouse on the ridge for over 40 years. She knew every